Got it all. Thank you very much, Freya, for the invitation to speak today. And I'm really happy to be here and with part of IWB. I've been involved with IWB for quite a few years now. And I've been on the other side of the presentation, actually listening to other people and hearing about the breadth of biomechanics in many different areas. So it's actually really nice for me to be able to share from my side what I do in terms of biomechanics and what that relates to in sport. So I'm really happy to be here today. Gonna see if this will work. Yes. If I can advance, if this is working. Yeah, can you see, still double checking that it's advancing? Yeah, great. So a bit of an outline today. So I've asked to speak a bit about Paralympic sport in the Netherlands, how we're organized. So I'll do a few case studies with para-athletics, looking at sprinting, and also wheelchair racing, some jump testing, which we do, and also paracycling for the road and the handbike. And for the Netherlands, it's pretty amazing that how much we do with Paralympic sports science as well and performances with the recent Paris Paralympics. I just got the medal tally this morning, added that in there to show we actually ended up 4th on the medal tally, and with a population of 18 million, that we're pretty proud of that. So I think that has a lot to do with the professionalization of Paralympic sports, of elite sports here in the Netherlands, with the science support, the strength and conditioning, the coaching level, and etc. So talk a little bit about that. So every day when I drive to work, I have to drive past this count time board of how many days till the next Olympics or the next Paralympics. And this is an old photo because it was before Tokyo. But this morning it had about 500 days till Milan. So we're already focusing towards that. And this summer, of course, for me was fantastic being in the Netherlands, Paris being so close, lucky enough to go to the Olympics as well as the Paralympics. And with the Paralympics, I actually managed to see some of the athletes worked with in the past perform and even get medals. So that was a great experience. So once I've done the Paralympic aspect, I'll talk a little bit more about the other part that I'm involved in, and that's the Female Athlete Project with TeamNL and what we actually do to support all the female athletes that train here. And a totally other part that I'll share as well is I've recently started my tenure as the President-elect of ISBS, the International Society of Biomechanics in Sports, which some of you might be aware of. And I'll explain a little bit about what we're doing there in terms of supporting our female members, but also what my thoughts or what our plans are for the next couple of years with the society. First, a bit more of the background. So I'm based at Papendal, which is the National Olympic Training Center. It is a multi-sport environment. So we have lots of different sports that train here, and it's actually the largest high-performance center in the Netherlands. So on a daily basis, we have over 550 elite athletes. So these range from 15-year-old handball players to sometimes 40-something-year-old Paralympic wheelchair racers or wheelchair basketball players. And I'm then a sports scientist, so my role is really to work as part of the support staff, and I'm really the bridge between the university and the coaches. And my primary role is servicing, and it's coach driven. So I try to help the coach and the athlete answer their questions. So I don't need to publish, I don't need to bring in funding, which might be music to some of you in your ears. That is not what I'm assessed on. I'm assessed on, is the coach happy with what information we've been able to give them? It also means officially not doing research, but we're still doing a lot of one-on-one testing and finding out, okay, what works best for this athlete? How can we translate it to that? Having said that, sometimes we get a question from a coach that is really time consuming for us to answer because we have so many different sports, or I don't have the time to commit to them. So we work with one of the universities in the Netherlands, and we're actually not affiliated with any university. So I can kind of pick which university and which supervisors that I know there. Okay, this one's a little bit better for biomechanics. This one's a bit better on modeling. This one's a little bit better on team sports, for example, or ACL reconstruction. And then we can find a student that's based there, a master student. We don't take bachelor students. And then they come and spend 6 months minimum with us to work on that particular project. So that's how we are able to do a bit of research and a little bit of publishing. But in general, that's not what our aim is. What type of sports do we support? Quite a few here. A few. Now, I realized this morning there's a few sports that didn't make the picture round. But we have a lot of team sports, but we also have a lot of individual sports with all the athletics, the track and field, and all the cycling. And we have the para aspects of those programs here as well. Wheelchair basketball is a very big program for us as well. And they just train in the same facilities as the Olympic athletes. So I think that's quite unique compared to a lot of other countries that splits the programs. Here, everyone trains in the same location. We have lunch in the same area. They train in the same strength and conditioning rooms, and we have the same staff that supports Olympic and Paralympic sports science. And where do we do testing? So we really test from a biomechanics point of view to look at performance enhancement. What can we do to improve their performance? Or on the injury prevention or injury rehabilitation aspect. So that's really the two things that I focus on. And we do have a lab, so more the sports science lab, where we can do more the physiology testing with the structured, which the COSMEDs with the VO2 max test and the wind gates, which obviously I don't do, the physiologists do that. But we do now also have a wheelchair ergometer, which I'll show a little bit later how we use that. And that's put in the lab as well in order for us to do those performance testing with the wheelchair athletes. But often we have to pack lots of stuff up and we go to the actual location of the training. So we're in the strength and conditioning room, or we're on the volleyball court, or on the sprint track on the top of the BMX track. You can see me hang in a beanie because it was really cold on top of the BMX track. So that's 8 meters high. So you have to grab all the equipment up the stairs 8 meters to do some testing there. And a few of my colleagues are lucky enough to go to then warm South Africa with some of the teams to actually do some testing there as well. So as much as possible, we try to do it in a location. But obviously, you don't get medals for being the best during training. So we actually want to assess what happened during competition as well. So here's some photos of a few of my other colleagues who were also in Tokyo. They went there to collect some data, or with the heat fest when it was really hot, to monitor the athletes, to assess performances. Some colleagues were there in Olympics as well. So looking at between the series and the finals and giving feedback to the coaches, for example. We also managed these yellow bars you see in the top right, and that was one of our indoor national championships for athletics. We were able to use what we call the optojump that collects contact times and step lengths with pole vaulting. So that's really nice to be able to actually collect some competition data. Here I'll go into some examples or some case studies. So we'll start with parathletics. So this is what we call sometimes our blade runners. And I knew very little about prostheses and how that works before I started working with these athletes. And on the top right, you see just a photo of a few different types of prostheses, which you can see right away. They're very varied. Some of these are probably more what we call tibial, so people that still have a knee, but not a tibia. And then you have other athletes that obviously have missing their femur as well. So those blades are different. Some have one prosthesis, some have two prostheses. So it really varies on what they have. And the disciplines that we look at is sprinting from 100 meters to about 400 meters, and then long jump is the other discipline that we look at. But how do you choose which one is best for the athlete? Step one, and this is a bit shame it works like this, is who are they sponsored by? There's lots of different companies that make these, and they provide the prostheses for the athletes, and they're very expensive. So the company will say, okay, I've got these. These are the ones that you get this time. And so when they're made in the factory, they're given a stiffness, and say, okay, this is a stiffness. I'll throw some numbers out there over like a 3.8, we call that. And then you give it to the athletes, and then we don't know what happens to it. We don't know how that stiffness evolves over time. We don't know when does it bend even more, but we do know that a few athletes have broken their blades during training, or in particular when with long jump, this has happened a bit, but we've also seen it with sprinting. So that's still really something that we want to work on. We want to have a way that we can still assess the stiffness of blades during training. So now it's really basic that some athletes write down every single training they've done with which blade, how many runs did they do, to try and quantify for themselves when do they feel that it's getting softer, or when do we see performances start to decline? Is it time for a new blade? So it's a lot of trial and error. Unfortunately, that's still what we have to do. And sometimes we'll have days where we just plan, okay, we're going to sprint today. We're looking at contact times. We're looking at step lengths, very similar to what the Olympians would do, the valid athletes, really. But it's a lot of trial and error. Okay, we're going to change this on your blade, or I don't have to do that. Luckily, we have a technician that understands blades way more than I do. But then we'll assess the blade and, okay, now you're going to sprint again. How does this work? Is it faster? How are the contact times? But then you sometimes have sprinters who, with a certain blade, they're really good in the start, but with another blade, they're a lot better when they've got their top speed. So how do you pick which one you should actually do in the 100 meters? You can't change the stiffness during the run. That's something we've tried to play with as well. Can you sometimes let it warm up during the run so that it becomes looser? But that's not allowed. So there's a lot of trial and error still of which blades work best. And some researchers have actually gone into modeling this, which is, I think, definitely part of the future. Going, okay, here we have this athlete, let's put them in the program, and let's use this model with these prostheses. What happens if they're running this way? What happens if running that way? We do see, however, though, that there's still athletes who have variations on how they feel with the blade, or how they'll perform this run or that run, because we assume when they're doing the testing that they're doing everything 100% the same, but in reality, physiologically, there will be likely some differences. But we also, besides the blade parts, really look at the kinematics. So we try to attach some biomechanics to that. So this is with sprinting. If anyone works with sprinting, some of these variables would be very similar. Where we look at, on the top left here, we look at what's called upper leg full extension and flexion. So you actually can see with the left and the right leg, just the hip flexion, and how with her left leg, she doesn't quite get that 90 degrees. But with her right, she does. So that's something that we worked on with this athlete quite a bit. And that is also similar with the ankle cross. You really see the differences, even though she's a double blader. So you'd think she'd be pretty similar on the left and right, and how she performs that. There were still some differences in her technique there. And then on the bottom graph, we tried to show a little bit what we do with, we just put a marker on her hip to kind of get a bit of an estimate of the center of mass, and actually looked at when she touches down and the blade bends in and has that energy built up, how much does she actually go into the ground, and how much does she actually rise back up, and how quickly does that work, to give a bit of an idea of the recoil that we get for those blades. So sometimes it's really just simple drawing a graph like that and showing the coach, okay, look, she's really going in a lot more into the ground here, but she's coming up quicker, or not, or this one's a bit too stiff. So those are the kind of feedback that we gave in terms of that. This is then what we do with the step length. I won't show a lot of numbers. I know for a biomechanics presentation, that's unusual, but I'm trying to explain a little bit more the process that we do for a lot of this testing. And here was a graph of, this is actually a long jump, and the bottom is the steps before they take off. So with one being the last step before they jump, and on the y-axis is the step length. So this comes out of the up to jump data, those yellow rails. And with this athlete, you can see lots of different runs that they've done. You can still see the inconsistencies within the session that can actually be present, and how variable they can still be. And then also how the influence of different blades, it really can vary quite a bit. And we don't expect, and we can't expect, particularly Paralympians, but we see this also with Olympians, to be symmetrical when they're sprinting, or even when they're jumping. Because when you're jumping off, you really have one leg that's a lot more dominant. For anyone that's interested in learning more about long jump, in particular with sports prosthesis, there was a lecture series from ISBS a few years ago, which is just on YouTube, where you can find where Dr. Johannes Funken from the German Sports University actually did a really nice webinar on modeling the prostheses and the long jump data. So if anyone wants to learn more about that, that's a really good one to look up. The other with athletics that we have, called the wheelchair racing. And this is really interesting because it goes from 100 meters to 42 kilometers. So really the marathon. And there were actually athletes this past summer that medaled in 100 meters and also won the marathon. So it's, on one hand, you could say that means the breadth of the sport is not very much there, but it's just really interesting that the same athlete can win both. So how much does it actually influence the energy system, and how much is it that we think is more mechanical? And so what we actually do is we have a wheelchair ergometer. This one was developed in the Netherlands. It's from Lode, which some of you might know for the Wingate tests as well. And what it actually does is we have a different wheel under the left and right wheel, like a measurement under the wheel. instead of it being one system. So what we can do here is actually measure the amount of force that they're generating onto the wheels, and they're separate from left and right, instead of a lot of what with cycling with the tacks where both wheels rotate at the same time. And one of the tests that we developed to test for this, because there were no tests didn't exist, so we developed our own performance test. And this is one that we've done quite regularly with a lot of athletes. We have a lot more knowledge about how this one works. And so just a 1 minute test. So how far and how fast can they go over 1 minute? And you can see here in this graph, the time is on the X and speed is on the Y, so in the kilometers per hour. So they're getting up to 40, this one's up to almost 42 kilometers an hour is what they can attain, obviously, on the system. So there's a lot less friction, obviously, than you would on the track. But here we see how the left and the right arm really deviate or vary near the end. So then we take that average speed, but you can see where that starts separating. So this one really has a right arm that's a lot more dominant than the left arm. And so we try to quantify that and see what we can do to improve, for example, the left arm, which will be the weakest link, so the average speed can improve. What we get out of those tests as well is also the push frequency. So within the same test, we say, okay, we can see the left and right push frequency, and underneath them the push time. So how long were their hands on the rims and were they able to push? What's interesting with this athlete is you can see here that the orange is the fastest, so that was the right arm, and the left is the blue, and that was the arm that was slower. And we can actually see that the time of the pushes with the right were a lot longer than with the left. So this probably doesn't help how the speed develops over that time. So this gives a lot more information about the technique and what's going on with these performances. With some of the athletes, we want to have a little bit more information about, okay, what do they actually do with their upper body? And here's an example of that. We use a lot of accents. If anyone's familiar with that system, it's also a Dutch system, which makes it easy that they're close by, but it's a system that I really like because we can use it in the field. And with Paralympic athletes, the window system is fantastic because you can just use half the body. They don't have legs, or we don't need the legs, so that's fine. You don't need to collect data of the legs. But those of you who've noticed that the pelvis is completely out of whack here, but that is exactly what this athlete also had. So that is still something that we consider. But so were some print screens from testing that we did on the ergometer, and you can actually see the differences in the shoulder position and in the arms and what was happening with this particular athlete. So this is a really good way as well to get more information about what is going on the ergometer, but on their wheelchair racing, and how we can improve their performance. What still is a big part, what I think of wheelchair racing, is how they sit in the chair. And that's not something that I learned much about, but I've learned a lot more working with these athletes and working with one of the technicians. And sometimes it means that you need to put a cushion under the right buttock, and then they're able to, so their pelvis a little bit more straighter. And then right away, we can see what influence does that have on the force they're able to produce on the wheel. So we do a lot of that trial and error as well in order to get that ideal position for them to perform. That's what we do with athletes on those fields. And then for a lot of them, we actually do jump testing as well. But obviously, not the athletes that aren't able to use their legs, but the ones that do have a prosthesis or even are small stature, we do a lot of jump testing, or the ones that are visually impaired, they do jump testing as well, so every few months. And this is not a para-athlete who's jumping. I just didn't have a good photo of a para-athlete jumping, but we use on the force decks, which has a separate left and right force plate, but then you have athletes with prostheses, and that does make it a lot more different. If anyone uses force decks, you know that their algorithms are put in there to right away detect what kind of jump it is. Is it a squat jump or is it a counter movement jump? But for a lot of these athletes, it doesn't work because the center of mass distribution is not what the algorithm expects, for example, or how their movement, where I can assess, yes, that's a good squat jump. It'll always come up, no, it's a counter movement jump, because they're not used to how their weight is distributed. So that is something to be aware of, that a lot of those systems are not used to work with para-athletes. The type of data we collect, not rocket science, so the squat jump, kind of movement jump, and then we track that longitudinally in an athlete management system. Here, grab some data out from one of our athletes that you can see over a 2-year period, her squat jump went from about 36 centimeters to 46 centimeters over that time. So we can really track how they're progressing. But we don't only look at max jump height. That's all the athletes remember. But we try to pull that apart. Okay, what was their concentric velocity? So how quickly did they do the jump? But also what's their max force that they're able to generate into the ground. We also get a really nice raw file, a raw graph that we can actually see how they've developed this jump. And here's an example of someone with a prosthesis. So the orange line is their prosthetic leg, and the blue line is their intact leg. You can't expect that they generate the same amount of force through it, but it's really important to understand how their weight is distributed, or how their muscles are able to, or have to absorb the forces during the landing. For a while, we did try to have them jump with their sprint blades on these force plates to see if we can get an idea of stiffness, if that was what gives us some information, but that didn't work as well as we were hoping. So we've actually let that go as well. But what's interesting with this one, we actually had an athlete who had a lot of groin problems on his intact leg. So on the left one is his intact leg. And what we actually saw during the jumping is when he was landing and taking off, he was really putting everything through that left leg and because you can't generate as much force through his prosthesis leg, but it led a lot to groin problems. And once we're able to show him that from, hey, you're actually really avoiding that right leg, which realize it's not as strong, but it's actually over using the strength of your left groin. So that's what we still use those principles with those athletes, but think a little bit different why they might be doing that. I'll flip now to paracycling, and sometimes we just get a question from a coach such as this: what's an optimal bike position for a Paralympic road cyclist with cerebral palsy? And if anyone here does a lot of bike fitting, you know that there's kind of general rules that you follow of where you should be positioned, where the tibia should be, and the pedal spindle. So what we did there is we tried that. Look, okay, let's see how she sits on the bike now, and how actually the forces are generated. So I find that's a really important performance measure. So we use some force pedals onto the pedal. We actually put force pedals on her bike pedals. And for those that aren't familiar, I'll explain really quickly how that works. Is you have the red rectangle, that is then the force pedal, and if the forces that help with the propulsion, so the effective force, the FE, runs tangential to that, and then the total force is a combination of what we call the unused and effective force. So you want to be really efficient in the force you are generating that's helping you with propulsion, and that it's not working against you. So we looked at her on the bike, put these force pedals on, and this is the data that we get. So we know that her left leg was shorter, and she had cerebral palsy in her left leg. So you see on the left side, this is the effective force. With the red line, it's just a lot less force that she can generate than with the green line, which is not too surprising. But on the right-hand side, that's the total force. That gives an idea of the direction that the force is being angled while she's pedaling. And if we focus on this area, this is what we call the 90 degrees when you're ahead, and you should actually be pushing down so you can help propulse the pedal, but she's actually pushing a lot more forward at this position. So again, we did a lot of trial and error. A lot of this is trial and error, but luckily we can do this all in one training session in the lab. And we finally came up with this position where we actually moved her saddle back behind the pedals, behind the bracket, which was not in line with what the ideal rules or the official bike fitting rules are. But then the reason we chose that one is because when we looked at the total force now in that 90, you can see at that point where it's circled that now she's angling the force straight down. That helps with that propulsion. We did see on the bottom part, we call the bottom dead center, that they weren't synced now, so we weren't able to describe or try to improve that much more, but we were able to improve the propulsion of that. So the coach was quite happy doing that. So a lot of the way that we do this is similar that you would do with Olympic athletes, but you do need to consider that it's not always going to be the same for Paralympic, or you need to think about their body and why they would producing less force, for example, with their left leg. And the other paracycling example is with hand biking. And interesting, I found this post again, actually for National Biomechanics Day in 2019. I was working with this athlete who's a hand biker. And the question came from his coach as well. For we want to look at his position and make him go faster. So if you do a literature review and how do you make a hand biker with a bottom left tibia amputation, what's the best bike position? You're not going to find it, or maybe you do now, but we didn't have it there. So we got him into the lab. And again, we put force pedals, but on his handles this time. So we wanted to see how much force can he generate. And it's the same principle again, is we looked at the effective force, we look at the left arm and look at the right arm, and you can see that there was quite a big difference there in that propulsion. So with one arm, he's really able to generate a lot more force than with that other arm. Again, we used Access to try to see, well, why is this case? And then we saw there was so much movement in his body, and also he was compensating so much with his trunk constantly because he was really not fixed very well in his bike, because you can fix the leg. So we looked at doing that. So he was able to generate more force instead of losing a lot of energy with that rotation. And this is some of the stuff that we got out of Xsense as well, looking at the shoulder positions, the shoulder angles. You really saw that left and right difference as well there. He didn't have any problems with or anything that was avoiding being able to move on with his upper body. He just was he had a left leg tibia amputation. So we really worked with him on looking at different positions. What position can he generate the most force with his hands then? And then how can we optimize that position in the bike in order to achieve that result? Those were a few of the biomechanics case studies. I'm happy to speak about those a little bit more. And then taking a little bit of a left turn, the other project I'm really involved in is the female athletes and about breaking taboos among female athletes. And this is not only for Paralympians, but also for the Olympians. And at Papendal here, we have about 49% of our athletes are female. And in a lot of programs, we have very few coaches that are female, and some programs don't have a single female in their staff. So no coaching, no physio, no strength conditioning, nutritionist, doctor, massage therapists are all men. And we all know that there's just certain aspects of being female that are different than being male, which we know can also influence our performance. So we try to break the taboo and discuss them. We talk about sports bras, breast injuries, saddle pain, urine loss, and the menstrual cycle, but also what impact it can have on your performance, and also what can you do about it. We run these workshops for the staff and the athletes separately, and we do that on purpose because when you're 16 years old and your coach is sitting next to you, you don't want to talk about potentially about when you're on your period and you feel like you can't train and you don't want to train. But for some of the staff, it's quite challenging as well. They don't quite know how they can talk to athletes about these topics. But we try to make it very practical in terms of, okay, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, but this is what you can do about it if you have problems with it. So actually just break the taboo. But then we decided a few years ago to do our own research because we knew in Australia and England they've done quite a bit, but we actually didn't know what in the Netherlands, what was going on with the issue. So we actually just published a paper a few months ago about this. And here's a table that I wanted to pull out because this doesn't get talked about very much, about breast injury and the urinary incontinence. We asked the athletes, well, what do you feel? How do you feel about how it impacted their performance? You can see that some are distracted by the pain. You avoid physical contact. You can't use your arms fully. I feel less coordinated. And so those are all things that when I show this to the coaches, hey, this is how these athletes feel because of this urine loss or because of these pain, then they realize that we need to talk about this or see what we can do. What are we doing? So we are continue giving these workshops for different programs and for the new athletes that come in. But from TeamNL, we have a new information campaign. We've identified 15 topics related to the female athletes that we're making infographics and info sheets from. Here's an example of it. I realize it's in Dutch. You're not meant to understand it, but I just wanted to show this is kind of the theme that how they're being put together. And so they're not only on websites, but for example, in the toilets or in the dressing rooms, there'll be these info sheets that they can look at and get some more information about these topics. We've managed to connect with Procter & Gamble and Always, and they've now provided free menstruation products for all our elite athletes. So we now have them in our toilets at the center here, so people can just take them if they need it, if the timing is off. And that's what we try to focus on, that sometimes your timing's off and you don't have anything, and you start your period. So here are places where you can get them. In addition, all elite athletes in the Netherlands can now apply just online and put their information in, and they get free products sent to their house. So we're really happy that Always have come on board to support us with that. We've also collaborated with some gynecologists who specialize in sport, so who can help those athletes that struggle with menstrual cycle and influencing their performance, to really work with them, going, okay, what can we do? Or do we need to look at different kind of contraception pill? Or when do we do that? How does that work within your training schedule? In addition, sports bra fitting is still something that we can do much better. Most athletes, they get pretty much everything from the federation, from shoes and socks to rain jackets and umbrellas and training suits, but you have to buy your own bra. So they buy their own bra. The younger ones tend to buy just cheap ones that they can find, don't really have much of an understanding of what should I look at, and they're expensive. So we've working now with a bra shop who has multiple different brands to organize these fitting sessions for athletes, but also to get a discount. If you're a TeamNL athlete, then you can get this % discount through their store. And we're hoping that the federations will help with that as well, so they can actually have some proper fitting bras, because you spend lots of money trying to measure core temperature and heat temp, but then they wear a really bad bra, which influences their step length and their breathing capacity, and we don't even consider about that. So that's what we're trying to get done in the next few months. Additionally, a lot of our athletes have to train if they're injured on a stationary bike. And in our strength and conditioning rooms, they all have the exact same bike, and they're not very comfortable for sitting on for a female more than 15 minutes. So we've put some new saddles options in those rooms, so athletes saddle pain came out as a big issue, and the reason why a lot of athletes stopped training or training as hard. So these are some practical things that we've managed to do. And I also try to support some coaches in looking at which athletes are struggling with their cycle, what can we do in terms of training, and what further support do they need. Okay, and then back swinging the other way, the final topic is talking about ISBS. So I became the president-elect in July of 2024, and I'm the first female president of the society in 30 years, which I find shocking. But also interestingly, for a society that is really meant to be applied and themed to really work with practice, I'm actually the first, what I would say, practitioner. So I'm not affiliated with any university, and I'm the first one ever for the society to have that kind of position, which I thought was interesting as well to note. But I was the vice president of research and projects for 4 years before this, and then I was in charge of the grants, of who got the research grants, but also projects of setting up initiatives during that time. And from that stemmed a lot of the female support that we did. For example, we did an analysis in 2020 to looking at our gender breakdown. And when you looked at the student membership, it was almost 50-50, the male-female. But just notice when you got to professional members, life members, and total members, just the amount of female members just dropped significantly. And I know this is not unique to ISBS. This is also the same in other biomechanics organizations. We started proactively encouraging some of the women's events, some online things that we did, especially during COVID, but also some live sessions or panel sessions that we now do at the conferences to try and promote supporting female biomechanists, but also obviously for allies to come. That's what the focus was, that this year is an ally event. I am myself, I'm a mother of 2, and I know how challenging it can be with kids and trying to balance it all. So we did a mother's cafe. It's a very informal way to meet other mothers or future mothers. We have a lot more now that come who aren't pregnant yet, but they want to know, how do you do this, or how do you go to conferences, or how do you handle with a family? So we tried to build a bit of a community with the mother's cafe. And we set up the women's mentor circles, which is a group of 5 or 6 women who come together at different stages in their life, and they meet every few months and you discuss something anything from self-confidence to imposter syndrome. And we were actually in our second round of these mentor circles. And after the first round, we did a bit of a survey to find out what impact that had. Some of you might have seen this paper, which came out recently in Sports Biomechanics, showing how it would empower women with their confidence and being part of the society. And we're really happy also to see that recently when we looked at the new directors that had come onto the board of ISBS, for the first time ever, we had more than 50% female. So that we hope that this will continue trickling through the society. Caregiver grants was something else we did to try and help get support women with paternity leave, but also men who are caring for others. So as a caregiver grants to start part of the society. And practical things like organizing nursing rooms at the conference. So what's my plan for the coming years? So officially, I'm then also head of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee as President-elect. We've actually just put to the members to make it an official Vice President position as at the next annual general meeting, because we think it's an important enough topic to have its own Vice President and not just to be part of someone else's task. Also I'm meeting with some other women biomechanists from, for example, ISB and the Australian, New Zealand Society of Biomechanics to see what we can learn from each other to really support more women in biomechanics. And on top of that, we want to do a membership audit similar to what IWB did. No, well, we actually don't know what our membership looks like in terms of their home language, in terms of their family responsibilities, in terms of their gender, in terms of sexuality. So in order to be able to support members, I think it's important to know what your membership, who your membership is. Next year, ISBS 2025 will be held in Qatar. There are also some members who have questions and concerns about it being in Qatar due to the human rights issues that Qatar has had in the past. And so there's some questions about that. So as part of the DEI committee, we're working with the organization, but also working with the members to see what do we need to do in order to answer those questions that certain members may have and reservations about going. Continue doing the conference events online and in person, and support the members from economically developing countries. That's something we really want to focus on now to really see what we can do financially to help members from those societies and organizations. Then finally, the primary purpose of ISBS are these three, which specifically also talks about coaches and bridging the gap between researchers and practitioners, which again, I mentioned I'm the first practitioner to be part of that. So I think I think it's very fitting that for the next few years, I really focus on how we can bring coaches closer to the biomechanics and really make that link. Because I think that's a really important step to move forward and how we really differentiate ourselves from other societies. I want to give you the snapshots of lots of different things that keep me busy. And I want to thank the IWB for inviting me to give this presentation today, and I hope I was able to stimulate some thought or share some new ideas, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ina. That was really interesting. Does anyone have any questions, I guess, on any part of Ina's talk? Feel free to unmute or to pop a question in the chat. Let's see if anyone's typing. I actually had a question, Ina. I wondered about when your limb loss participants who have a prosthesis, when they do the jump, do they do the jump test as well? And is there any concern about the maximum force of the different prosthetic parts? Because I think in terms of like loading, yeah, there's limits for the different materials and products.
Yeah, so we only do the ones who have one prosthetic. So the ones that are double amputees, we don't do it. Although I think they probably could, but then they. So we tried it for a while with their running prosthesis, but they have a different one that they use during the day or for strength training. So we've tried both, but at the moment we haven't had any issues with it. And just see they can handle a lot, those prostheses. So that's not big of an issue. The ones that do snap is when they're long jumping and they're put all their weight on one leg, and it's one they've had for 6 months. And that's the only thing that we've noticed. But that's another reason we'd really like to be able to track the stiffness, or track how, not only from a performance point of view, but from a safety point of view, because psychologically it made a huge impact when those prostheses snapped during jumping, because is it going to snap again? It's like doing an ACL, is it going to happen again? But from a performance, so when do we know that we're getting the best out of the prostheses? But during jumping hasn't really been an issue at all.
Interesting, thanks.
Yeah.
Got a question from Anna in the chat about experimental tests with the athlete. Do you consider using predictive simulations to try and find optimal values instead of trial and error? For example, find the optimal saddle position for each person using a digital twin or a simple musculoskeletal model, or is it not, or is it too difficult to do, not worth exploring due to the complexity?
I think that's super interesting and would love to do that. That's probably where we run our limits, that the time that we have to do something like that. And but a big problem is it's really an N of one. You know, elite athletes are an N of one anyway, but all the different disabilities are so different. So how really finding it per athlete would be really interesting. So I know a few people have done that in the UK and then in Cologne as well. And then always they're presenting the the N of one of looking at predictive, doing the things. But that's not something that we standard, but I think that would be really interesting to be able to work towards that, to work with students or universities to indeed find exactly the optimal method. Now it feels really basic what we do with, okay, run again. Okay, run again. Let's see if you do it differently. But that's where in the applied world, that's still where we are. It's still a bit too far what the universities are doing, unfortunately. Yeah. But if anyone wants to do that for us, let me know. I'd be quite happy to brainstorm if you're looking for a project.
Yeah, you got a few years now before Milan to implement something.
And we're very willing athletes. Maybe that's good. So the Paralympic athletes, I think, are fantastic to work with. They're very open to trying new things and really friendly and lovely. And yeah, so if, they're just really appreciative if anyone does anything for them. So that's very different to some of the Olympic athletes. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I had a question.
Yep. Go for it.
Do you ever find with your sprinting athletes that the residual limb length makes a difference? So if you have a Symes amputation versus transtibial, kind of that residual limb making any difference in the jumping task or in the sprinting that they're doing?
If that makes any difference. Well, obviously the prosthesis makes it different because you see how someone runs with a transfemoral amputation is very different to a transtibial. So you see that, and I think the other leg has to do a lot more. We do see that people are playing a lot, like the Germans are doing this a lot. They're playing with the length of the prosthesis leg because you can manipulate how long you're allowed to be, for example. So they have a really massive prosthesis leg, and so when you're running, it looks you're almost like bouncing left and right. But it's really trying to find that optimal balance of what you get out of the return that you get from a prosthesis, because that's way more efficient than an Achilles tendon. That they play around with that. But in terms of the residual leg, no, we haven't really looked too much about how that influences it. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. That was actually, I'll say, so with our double amputees, that's one of the ethical things that we look at, is that some of them were completely grown before they had before she had her legs amputated. So we knew how tall she was, but according to the IPC rules, she can actually be taller. So do we make prostheses that make her taller, which means she gets more energy out of them, which means she performs better, but her muscles aren't used to her being that tall? Or do we just say, no, this is how tall she was? So it's a very interesting ethical issue as well sometimes, or what's allowed, pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I have a question, Nina. Thanks for that presentation. When you were talking about the simulations and touching base again in what Anna was suggesting, how do you manage, because everyone is so individual, that you were saying, and one, what possibilities do you reckon, or how would you be doing that when we want things that are standardized, but everyone is so unique with their needs? In practice, in the real life, how do you manage those things?
It's a lot of discussing with the coach. Just keeping the data going. This is what we see when they start. This is what they see when they sprint. It might be totally different to athlete A and athlete B, but they have a lot more insights, and the Paralympics are really good at altering their technique quickly, because they can put a new prosthesis on and 2 runs up, yeah, I'm ready to go. Whereas a lot of times it takes people a couple of weeks before they really get used to that new setup, for example. But they're really good at fixing or adjusting their technique when it comes to that. But it's a lot of, I try to give them numbers and some suggestions, but that really working with the coach of, hey, then this is the one, this is right for this athlete and this is right for that athlete. But I would love to have a bit more evidence for that. So I think modeling would be really interesting if we can go that route. Yeah.
I just lost my button. Do you ever struggle to find participants, since this is a unique population, and do you have any strategies to overcome that?
In general, no, because it's athletes that train here and the coach comes, and again, it's not, you know, big research study, it's the end of one, or let's look at this training group. But recently we did think about just looking at something with a technique with transtibial athletes, and then we would need a lot more sprinters who are at a certain level and who have that amputation. But that's when the community is really important. So we have a lot of contact with different other countries, and often you're quite happy to work together if it's something that would benefit everyone. For example, in Cologne, they did a study years ago with the long jumpers where they were trying to test if there was an advantage to using a prosthesis with long jump or not. So there were athletes from multiple different countries who participated in that study, and they all went to Cologne and did everything. And that was a bit more a bigger project from the IPC, because they wanted to see if was a prosthesis a advantage or disadvantage, which is still a discussion. Yeah.
I have another question. Do you use any of the period tracking apps, or just sort of just diaries by yourself, stuff like that? And so how long have you been doing that, and how's that impacted the way that you work, or has it not as much as you think it might? I don't know.
Yeah, it varies per sport. It's really interesting. So we just give the advice to do that, and we have lots of different programs, and some programs are fantastic and I've been doing it for years, and sometimes to the extent of the coach says, if you don't fill, because we have an athlete management system, Smartabase it's called, that if you don't fill in the morning, if you're on your period and how you feel, then you don't train. Because if I don't know how you feel, then I can't manage your training. Some aren't that extreme. They think, oh, I don't care if you're on your period, I don't want to know, tell the physio. So it's really extreme in how the coaches handle it. We've tried to change it so they fill it in the app, but it used to be what I thought a very negative way. Or how do you, or what symptoms do you have? And I was like, well, some people, we saw in our study as well, about 8% actually feel better when they're on their period. And we're losing that 8% because I was saying, oh, you poor thing, you're on your period. Like, no, it's not for everyone that of a negative thing. So we just changed it to, are you on your period? Yes or no? How do you feel? So everything from I've got cramps, or I'm tired, to I feel strong, I've got more energy. So you can actually try and see which athletes feel that way, and can we see some trends over time? So that's what we're trying to do with some of the programs now, is look at their data together. Okay, which athletes struggle? So that doesn't mean when there's a game they can't play, but let's try different interventions now with nutrition, or with recovery, or with painkillers, and see what works. So when there is an important game that we know, okay, well, you have an important game coming up, you're likely going to be on your period, so we know that this and this and this works for you. So that's how the US really approached it, very in a practical way. And I think that's the way that we need to go, instead of, oh, you're on your period, okay, you can't play this game because you usually don't feel well. And that's what athletes are worried about, that, oh, they're not going to pick me because they'll see I'm on my period, which we want to get rid of that attitude. Yeah.
Interesting. Any final questions? I think.
Sorry, I have another one. I'm curious, because you mentioned that you are the first female president. How was any? Sorry, yes. So
okay.
how it was like? Did that make any difference or any impact, or did you face like specific challenges that you could tell that was very different from the history of having mainly male leaders there?
No, not at all. And it was really interesting because I was the vice president for 4 years, and 2 years into that, I was actually approached to stand for president then by a few of the other members, and I thought, no, I can't. I just started vice president. I know what I'm doing, but I've noticed maybe it's the committee that's there now, but very supportive and encouraging, and all those initiatives were so easy to set up. And some of them were even suggested by some of the male members. So you definitely don't feel any resistance from them going, oh, no, we can't do this. And even with our events, we have a lot of men that come to the events. It's one of the reasons we want to change to not women's events, but DEI events, because they think, oh, it's only for women. It's like, no, it's actually to support women. But so absolutely not. I haven't felt any resistant that way. It's probably more my confidence, and I think, am I ready for this? Or the fact that being the first female for that long doesn't really concern me. It's just more, do I feel like I'm ready to be president of the society? But yeah, no, I that's why this time I thought, okay, I'm ready to give this a go. So see how that goes. Yeah.
Great. Well, that is such perfect timing. Bang on the hour, whatever the hour is where you are. Thank you so much, Ina. That was really interesting and really inspiring, and like just really nice to hear such a balanced kind of overview of all the sort of professional work and then all the extra work you do, and and sort of the caring duties that you have, and how you balance all of that. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the invite.
It's a pleasure. Have a lovely day, everyone, wherever you are, and we'll see you for the November meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.